Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our series of podcasts that we call Menninger Mindscape. I'm Dr. John Oldham, Chief of Staff at Menninger, and it's my pleasure to have as our guest today Dr. Stuart Yudofsky, Hey, Stuart, who is the chairman of the Menninger Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences here at Baylor. And it's really timely to have a chance to talk to you, Stuart, because Dr. Yudofsky has announced that he will be retiring at the end of this calendar year, so that's just a little more than a month away.
Yes.
And I don't know what his hurry is, because he's been chairman only about a quarter of a century, but he's decided that it's time. Stuart, you and I go way back, don't we?
We do, John.
So having both been here at Baylor as medical students, we won't go that far back today.
Okay, we don't have quite that much time.
But talk to us a little bit about your early days when you came here at a time when the department was not as large as it is now, and that was a new big opportunity for you. So tell us a little about that.
It really was. John, it actually is related to our early days when you and I went to medical school here. Baylor was transforming and pioneering open heart surgery with Dr. Debakey in adults and Dr. Denton Cooley in children. And so I was chairman of the department at University of Chicago and had been there 4 or 5 years or so when I get a call on my inner office line that not everybody has the number to. And they go, and someone says, "Hello, Stuart." And I go, "Dr. Debakey?" I had not heard from him since I graduated in 1970 from Baylor.
But you recognized his voice.
Oh, yes. I held enough retractors for him as a medical student. I recognized his voice. I said, "Is that you, Dr. Debakey?" He said, "Yes, Stuart, now let's get down to business. Our chairman at Psychiatry is retiring, and from what I heard and what I saw when you were a medical student, we think you're the guy. So come down here." And I said, "Well, Dr. Debakey, I haven't been here very long at University of Chicago." And he said, no aspersions there, but this is what he said. He said, "Stuart, I know the University of Chicago. It's too small. You can put the whole place in one wing at Texas Children's Hospital. Come on down here, you can change the world like we did in heart surgery." So I talked with my wife, Beth, who's also a psychiatrist, as you know, John. And she said, "Well, go take a look. You've always loved Baylor and Houston. Go down and take a look." And I was so excited to be back in Houston and to be back at Baylor. And I was having a good time in Chicago, and it's an extraordinary school. But that's how I got back to Baylor College of Medicine.
Oh, that's a great story. And it was already Texas Medical Center, a great big powerhouse at the time, though compared to today, it was not nearly as large as it already is now.
Well, John, it was a shock. I had not been back there. It was now about 1990. So it was 20 years since I'd been in Houston, and I couldn't recognize the medical center. It looked like an oil field because there were derricks everywhere, but they weren't derricks to build oil rigs. They were building buildings, hospitals, MD Anderson, Texas Children's, Methodist Hospital, Baylor itself. All the affiliated institutions were just exploding. And I had not seen the new Bentham Hospital, which is now called Harris Health. So and interestingly enough, and of course, the VA brand new building, which is, they say, we have to worry about hyperbole, don't we, John, in Texas?
Yeah.
But I've been told that it's the second biggest federal building outside the Pentagon. So
I've heard that too. It's just amazing.
I don't know if that's true, but I know it's big. And psychiatry had enormous potential in each of those affiliated institutions.
Well, tell us a little bit about how you experienced the department when you came. What did it feel like the right fit for you, and what were the strong aspects, and what aspects did you think there were opportunities to grow?
It felt like a wonderful fit the real problem is that it had been a sleepy department. The Houston community, which is so supportive, which made that growth in the medical center possible, didn't even know there was a Baylor Department of Psychiatry to any extent. So I asked Dr. Debakey, I said, well, how do we put ourselves on the map and get some of this support? And he said, Stuart, there's only one way. You have to take care of the people in Houston. You have to be a symbol and a model. And I wasn't doing quite so much of that at the University of Chicago. It was largely administrative and teaching and research. And they said, but here in Houston, that's what we need now. That's how I did it, and that's how you need to do it. And he said, and I can assure you, everybody who I operate on their hearts, they all have psychiatric disorders, either themselves or their family. So, and then he said one other thing, John, that I'll never forget. Remember his long hands? Yeah. He said, and don't do this, Stuart. And I knew exactly, he was a man of few words, and he meant don't just take care of them for a year or two and then ask them. Really take care of them, and I did, and as a symbol for the department, and I, as a symbol of the department, as you've always done, John, I talked every time that any advocacy group needed a speaker. I became quite visible, as did other members of the department. It certainly was not all me. And our budget was very modest. And then the department, through its affiliated institutions, just grew exponentially. And the support that enabled that growth did come, as Dr. Debakey had intimated, from the Houston community. Now we are a very large department, as you know, and we are enriched in all areas. And we'll talk later about the Menninger Clinic, mm-hmm. that you've been so important in its growth and development here in Houston. But each of the individual institutions, and I'll name them, where we have strong departments within the institutions. The Michael E. Debakey Veterans Affairs Hospital, one of the largest mental health activities in the country. At Harris Health, which is the Bentow, where it's a county hospital where we take care of the poor. And Lincoln said, God sure must have loved the poor folks, because he sure made plenty of us. So there are plenty of people treated at Harris Health, the one county hospital in Houston, fourth biggest city in the United States. There are plenty of people who have psychiatric disorders, and our Baylor faculty are the ones who take care of all of them. In fact, my wife Beth was head of the consultation liaison service there for many years.
Those two divisions of the department were in place when you came?
They were in place, but they had only a handful of people in each. Now we have tens and 20s of people. In fact, as you know, Dr. Asim Shah, the head of Harris Health, in the last couple of years has hired 15 new psychiatrists. I think there were 5 or 6 when I came.
Yeah, so there's been a lot of growth. And the emphasis when you came in the tradition of the department had certainly been strongly supportive of education and training. I think that was one of the...
I think that was the diamond in our tiara. Education has always been emphasized at Baylor since we were medical students. When we were there, John, as medical students, we had an intimate relationship with almost every faculty member. Now, as the college has grown so much since then, and the faculty have grown, and our responsibility has grown, that's not always possible, but the emphasis and the prioritization on education is always first and foremost. It's a medical school. Baylor, by the way, is one of the few private medical schools. It is private and independent. There are many private, not-for-profit medical schools, and Baylor's a private, not-for-profit, but it's independent of a university. So what I mean by that is when I had to develop something at University of Chicago, It had to be approved by a provost who could have been the head of the music department, and that was the case when I was there, and the president, who was a brilliant historian. They didn't know a whole lot about opening up neuropsych units. At Baylor, the president is a physician and has always been a physician and understands medical care. And education is a priority. And that's certainly in the department with Jim Lomax and his team, first rate, and actually led the country in many areas.
Well, departments, you've been around and been head of a number of departments and very familiar with departments across the country.
Yes.
And they sort of have different flavors.
Yes.
Some of them
Yes.
will be very strong in research,
Yes.
others very strong in psychopharmacology,
Yes.
others very strong in teaching psychotherapy as part of the education. What were the main emphases and what was strongest in the department when you came?
Well, the emphasis was definitely on education and clinical service. There was some research going on, but very small. It had some sleep research and some research in behavioral psychology. Very good research, but quite modest. But our educational enterprise was first rate. The problem was a lot of the great Baylor medical students, like you, John, who were trained at Baylor, went elsewhere for their residencies in psychiatry. And so I think we just needed to grow in order to keep them. And as you know, this year, although we only have 12 residents coming into our PGY1, our first year of residency, we have something like 800 applicants for those 12 positions. So the national interest in our educational program, although it has always been good, there is much more of a recognition nationally of the qualities that we have and the opportunities here.
Sure. Well, I think the wisdom of Dr. Debakey was, of course, well known in all kinds of areas, but it was certainly illustrated by his reaching out to you and your steady leadership in the department, as well as your vision and support to help it grow, has really been demonstrated through your career, and it's been a long, you're probably one of the group of chairs in the country with the longest tenure.
Well, thank you, John. I'll ask you, what is the average tenure of a chair these days?
Well, I'm told it's about 6 to 8 years.
6 to 8 years.
That, right.
Well, I think I've stayed on a little bit beyond my time.
Well,
I do, and I think I'm so excited to see the new era at Baylor. I think that right now we remain strong in clinical service, community service, and education, first rate. As you know, John, 18 medical students in last year's class went into psychiatry. It shows that as their specialties.
Yeah, and that's a lot higher than the national average.
It's more than twice as high as the national average. So we're doing something to really inspire the medical students, who are all excellent. And I think that the area that we can really grow, and I think that I've done my best to create that platform, that there's a great platform and foundation for the next leadership to develop our research. Now, we have fine research now in some extremely innovative areas, including your work in the Mind-Brain program to show the changes that people who have intensive care at the Menninger Clinic have biologically, doing brain imaging and genetic testing. Tom Costin's work, which is pioneer work on vaccines for addictive disorders of all types. David Arsenagis's work in neuropsychiatry, one of the leading neuropsychiatrists and head injury experts in the world. Sanjay Matthews' work in mood disorders, and Mark Koenig's and Mindy Stanley's work in anxiety and in the elderly. We do great research, but we are just touching upon our potential. And I think the new leadership will carry us there.
Yeah, that's terrific. Well, that's a good segue, because just to the viewers, we're going to have another opportunity to chat with Dr. Yudofsky and learn a little bit more about fast-forwarding the arrival of the Menninger Clinic as part of the department. And that was a big job that took a lot of effort, and Stuart was really right at the head of that very, very strong outreach that ended up succeeding. But we'll talk about that in a separate podcast, and we're out of time for this one. But we're delighted that you could join us, and look forward to hearing a little bit more next time.
Thank you, John, for having me.
Good. And thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.